And then once I started learning about sleep and what happens while you sleep, I'm like, holy crap, this could literally explain every single symptom. So he literally throws everything he has in the trash. Gets on a plane, goes down to Peru, lives with a shaman, literally nude in the Amazon for 30 days. We know how crooked the whole medical system is now. COVID has unveiled anyone, if anyone ever had any doubts.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Good Trip Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Pella. You already know this is a series of incredible conversations with incredible guests from the fields of entertainment, medicine, business, and beyond, each with their own unique perspectives and experiences regarding psychedelic medicines, both for personal use and therapeutic medicinal use. And the man I am talking to today sure knows about both. Dr. Kirk Parsley, the founder of Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy, is a former Navy SEAL who I met down in San Diego at the VETS event in 2022. Kirk Parsley worked with a lot of Navy SEALs who had suffered traumatic brain injuries and were going through a lot of PTSD-style symptoms, and he identified a couple different through lines with the folks he was working with, one of which was that they were all taking high amounts of Ambien. If not all of them, many or most of them were taking a lot of Ambien. And that led him down the path of sleep research that led to his launch of Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy, sleep aid medicines and supplements. And he also got into really amazing detail on the inner workings of the brain and the neuroplasticity of the brain, and how psychedelics can not only improve your sleep, but can also improve and fix and reconnect a lot of the neurological pathways in your brain. And if that all sounds like crazy stuff that you've never heard of before, you're about to learn a whole lot of lessons in this episode. And if all that stuff you already know about, I guarantee you're going to learn a whole lot more, because this man is full of knowledge, okay? I loved talking to him. I have such a deep respect for his work and the intentions that he has behind his work and behind working with all the Navy SEALs that he did and what he's doing now to help improve people's lives with his own brand and his own line of products. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy. Now, I travel across the country doing stand-up shows at night on all different sides of America. The East Coast, the West Coast, the Middle West, Middle East, all the different places. So my body is always trying to get used to different time zones, which means my rest and my recovery and my sleep is constantly being affected. That's why I bring Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy with me on the road, because it helps me ease into sleep with its natural ingredients, including L-tryptophan, magnesium, and other key compounds that can help your body ease into a relaxed state and assist in you waking up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the next day. It comes in tea bag form or capsule form, so if you don't like drinking a bunch of water late at night, get the capsules. And cruise over to docparsley.com/Brent to learn more about my favorite sleep supplement and get a discount on your order. And this episode of the podcast also brought to you by Odyssey. Odyssey is a sparkling energy drink with 85 milligrams of caffeine from green tea. That's roughly the same amount of caffeine that you get in a cup of coffee. However, in my own personal experience, the caffeine from green tea that's put into these Odyssey sparkling elixir tonics does not give me the jitters and the anxiety that caffeine usually does when I'm chugging a bunch of coffee. Odyssey is also made with 2,500 milligrams of mushrooms, not magic mushrooms, not yet anyways, as you might find out when I talk to the CEO of Odyssey, Scott Froman, a little bit later in the Good Trip podcast series. This energy drink has lion's mane and cordyceps, designed specifically to free your mind, stimulate your mind, and give you a smooth energy that can last you through the day. You can find Odyssey in a whole bunch of stores if you head to odysseyelixir.com. Also check out Amazon, because they ship through Amazon, so you can get Odyssey delivered directly to your door. Incorporate Odyssey into your life to get a swift boost of energy, and your life might just become an Odyssey. How fun is that? So, without further ado, everybody, please enjoy this uninterrupted trip with Doc Kirk Parsley. So how do you know the VETS folks? So did you know Marcus from the SEALs?
No, I didn't know Marcus, but one of my closest friend from the SEAL teams, so a guy I went through training with, who's my roommate all through SEAL training. He worked with Marcus very closely. So he was a dev group with Marcus, which is like our Super SEALs squad, right? And my buddy was like, really, really struggling and like having like, just a terrible time. And he was suicidal, and his wife actually called me, not him, because he's a typical dude who's not going to call for help even. And he'd been in like the psychological psychiatric health program of the military and the VA for 6 or 7 years already. Like he'd done all the stuff. Like he'd done the cell ganglion block. He'd done transcranial magnets. He'd done like all the things that are
transcranial magnets.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Oh my God! All right, bookmark that.
So he's done all the stuff, taken all the pharmaceuticals, and he wasn't emotional. He wasn't erratic. He was just like, hey, I've written down these 37 reasons why it'd be better if I was dead. And just very matter of fact, I was going through them. And just coincidentally, a few months before, Martin Polanco, I don't know if you've heard him, he's one of the big Ibogaine doctors. And he was kind of the primary one at that time. And he had a clinic down in Tijuana, and it was called Crossroads. I think Eric Clapton had kind of made it famous because that's where he went after his son. His son had died, and he went down there to do Ibogaine and felt, had a big relief from it. So, but they had come to me to talk to me about opiate addiction because Ibogaine is really good for opiate addiction. It's good for all addictions, and if we get into the neurophysiology of what we know about Ibogaine, it makes sense why it helps people with brain damage and people with. So anyway. I just listened to my buddy. I talked to him for like hours. He was coming on the morning. I went over his house maybe around midnight, and like the sun's coming up, and we're still talking. And I'm like, well, look, you're going to kill yourself anyway. I've been reading about this stuff, but these guys had come up to talk to me about this opiate addiction. I'm like, I actually don't have a lot of that in the SEAL teams. Like it's surprising.
Not a lot of opiate addictions.
No.
Yeah.
No. So like the military in general has a lot of that from the chronic pain and all that, but I didn't deal with a lot of it. And if guys were addicted to it, I didn't know about it. And like active duty SEALs, it's hard for them to be addicted to anything because
you're active duty.
Yeah, they're active, and almost anything that they take is in their medical record, and almost anything that they take that affects their brain or cognition or mood or anything like that is disqualifying. So, like, we just didn't have a whole lot of it. But he did say that there was some sort of cutting edge, newer stuff where they're looking at it for PTSD, and PTSD. Whether that's a real thing or a misnomer. It's just a conglomeration of symptoms, right? And I think it has a lot to do with the brain damage from the job itself, the brain damage. And so I was like, I have read about this. A few people have died from it. It can cause some arrhythmias, something called the QT interval. It cause changes in that, and you can get a lifelong arrhythmia from Ibogaine use. And some people have died. And I'm like, and usually anytime I would come across any kind of new treatment for the guys, because even after I got out, I still kept treating any SEAL who would call me and all the retired SEALs and all that stuff. And so any kind of new modality came out, like transcranial magnet or something, I'd be like, well, I'm going to go try that first and see if I think this guy's a quack and see what the experience is like and whatever before I'd refer anybody. And so I wanted to do the Ibogaine myself first, but this just got thrust upon me. I'm like, well, if you're going to kill yourself anyway, this might kill you, but hey, what would be the difference, right? Instead of you shooting yourself tonight, you die tomorrow under the influence of drug. So anyway, he agreed to it, which actually surprised me, knowing him. And so we rented out the whole clinic because he wouldn't let anybody else be there. And so it was a 6-bed facility when we rented out the whole thing. And I knew one SEAL who was actually at the event. I don't know if you met him, McCall Vega. So he's out here He's like the producer of Call of Duty now or something.
Oh, good for him.
He's doing some cool stuff.
Yeah.
And he was like my darkest patient ever in medicine. Like if anybody was going to come in my office and murder suicide, it was like this guy, right?
Sure.
And he was just dark, and he had a ton of brain damage. He had a ton of just bad
from his days in active duty.
Yeah, and he was my patient while he was active, right?
So when you were in the SEALs, were you in medicine specifically?
So I was actually a high school dropout, and I dropped out to join the Navy.
Oh, no way.
To get myself, make sure, reduce my risk of going to prison, really, because like I didn't behave well when I was young. And when I heard about the SEAL training thing, it's supposed to be the toughest training in the world. I didn't know what a SEAL did. I knew that the BUDS was like this really hard training.
You just kind of knew they were a bunch of badasses?
I'd seen a video of the training.
Yeah.
On it's like a news documentary show, like 60 Minutes, but it's called 48 Hours. And so they covered it for 48 hours. They covered Hell Week for 48 hours. And they're like, this is the toughest training in the world. I'm like, I'm going to go do the toughest training in the world. And that's why I signed up. So I went to the Navy recruiter, and I'm like, hey, can I get in? And he's like, so we started negotiating all of it. And he's like, well, you're really going to need a high school degree. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've been in high school 4 years, but I'm still a couple of years from graduating.
Were you 18 at this time?
I was 17.
Okay.
But my mom signed off, and so I joined. And then, left a few months later. It was a little different then. You had to go through a different, you went through the regular Navy boot camp. Then you had to go get some sort of job training because most people fail, obviously. So you have to have a job to go to when you fail.
Okay.
And so I did all that, and then I went to BUDS. But anyway, this guy, McCall, he had been through all of this stuff as well, and he had, well, I didn't finish that. So anyway, I was a SEAL, and then I left. I got out of the Navy completely, fell in love with a girl from San Diego, got married, started having kids, started college. I had to start junior college because I didn't have a high school diploma, and then did really well. And I was thinking I might be a physical therapist or an athletic trainer or something. And I was working at San Diego Sports Medicine Center, and I got to know a bunch of the doctors, and like, you should go to medical school. And I'm like, whoa, pump the brakes there, Sparky. It's like I'm a high school dropout.
I'm not a school guy.
Like medical school's not. And they're like, yeah, you. And so the head doctor there, Lee Rice, comes out, and he says, he just overhears the conversation. He's like, so Kirk, the question isn't, can you get into medical school? The question is, would you go if you could get in? I was like, of course. And he's like, well, then you kind of have to try, don't you? And I was like, good point.
Wow,
so,
yeah.
So then when I was applying for medical school, I found out that the military had its own medical school, and I didn't know that. And so I looked into that, and they'll pay me to go to medical school. And I was already married, had a kid, had another kid on the way. I'm like, well, so my wife doesn't have to work. I can support my family while I'm going to medical school, and I know I'll get back to the SEAL teams and be able to go give back to the community, right? And so that's what I did. And then so I ended up being the doctor at the SEAL teams my last almost 4 years in the Navy. And then this guy McCall comes in, and he damaged long before I met him. And he had switched coast, and he was over, and he was just dark. Just he's just a scary, intimidating guy. Anyway, so he gets out of the Navy after years of fighting over medical qualifications, like what they call a med board, which is like forcing you out of the military because you're not medically qualified versus just retiring. I don't know, it's a long saga. He actually ended up having a stimulant-induced heart attack because they're giving him so many drugs to get him to sleep. Damn. And then they had to give him so many stimulants, like Adderall and all this stuff during the day. And so so he gets out, and he's like, I'm not dying from these drugs. If I'm going to die from what's wrong with me, I'm going to die from what's wrong with me. So he literally throws everything he has in the trash, gets on a plane, goes down to Peru, lives with a shaman, literally nude in the Amazon.
How did he do
30 days?
Who was the inspiration for him to do that?
I have no idea.
Really?
I have no idea.
So he took it upon himself?
Yeah, he took this upon himself. I knew nothing about psychedelics, and that's the whole point of this.
Okay.
And so anyway, he goes down to Peru, does Kundalini yoga like 6 to 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
Does ayahuasca, I think, every other night or every third night or something. Heals himself, comes back. There's a fundraiser that we do every year in San Diego, Dick's Last Resort. And, I'm a doctor. I've been a doctor for like couple of thousand SEALs. So guys come up to me and talk to me all the time, and it takes me a while to figure out who they are often. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I'm like, But this guy had been in my office for hundreds of hours. Like, he just came and sat and just talked and said dark things. And I was afraid to ask him to leave.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, well, let's talk.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he just threw everything away, went down there, has this transformation. He comes and sits across the table this close to me, at Dick's Last Resort, and starts talking to me, and I'm like, this guy's kind of familiar, but who is he? Who is he? And so think about it, it's been like maybe it's been 9 months since I've seen him, but somebody I'd spent hundreds of hours with this far apart, right?
Yeah. And
I can't pick up on who he is, and I'm like, geez, like, oh, okay. So about 20 minutes into it, he says something, and I'm like, Hooch? He's like, who'd you think I was? I was like, I don't know.
Wow.
You still don't look like you.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was different.
You
like,
transformed fully,
completely transformed. I can show you. He was at VETS as well, and I have pictures of he and I together. And then he did a podcast recently, and they posted a picture of him like when he was a SEAL.
Yeah.
And so everybody I've told the story to, I sent them a picture of him.
Yeah.
From back then. I'm like, can you see why I don't recognize
That's
him?
wild.
Because you can't tell.
So was this the first time you had been introduced to somebody who had a transformational experience with psychedelics?
So he tells me about this ayahuasca stuff. I don't even know what the hell that is. Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, ayahuasca, what's this? And so he tells me the story, and it sounds crazy to me, but I'm like, it obviously works. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, maybe. So then when these people come and talk to me, these two doctors from Mexico come up and talk to me about Ibogaine, I'm like, well, you know, I did have this guy who did, and I asked him, I was like, how's this compared to ayahuasca? And they're like, well, super similar, but like this is just a harsher, more direct line of, they call it the father of psychedelics, and ayahuasca is the mother, right? So it's just a harsher lesson, but pharmacologically, it turns out to be much more interesting for different ways, or for different reasons. But anyway. So I'm like, well, maybe. And so I called him. I'm like, hey, McCall, I got a buddy, and I can't tell you who he is. He didn't want anybody to know. But we're going down and we're doing this thing called Ibogaine. And he's like, yeah, I know what that is. And I'm like, okay, you're the only guy I know who's ever done this psychedelic. So would you mind coming down with us? And so he caught the train from LA. Another crazy story. My buddy's he's just like a hard brooding guy, and a lot of people say he's like the scariest SEAL alive. Like you just see him and everybody's afraid of him. He looks like the 18-year-old kid I know. Like to me, I can't see it. It's like when I look at my 300-pound son, I don't think of him as a big guy, because I'm like, whatever, it's my little kid.
Right.
So anyway, he's not accepting. He's sitting there, he's frumping, mean mugging, and he's like, who's this guy again? And I'm like, well, I can't remember his real name, but he's changed his name to McCall because he's in Hollywood now, and they all have stage names or whatever. And so when he gets in the car, I'm like, hey, McCall, what's your real name again? And he's like, that is my real name. Like I changed it. Like I'm like, so what was your name before you changed it? And, so he tells us, and then he goes, you know why I changed my name, right? And I was like, because you're an actor, and they all do that. And he's like, no. He said it was in tribute to my swim buddy in Buds who died. He died in combat overseas, and his name was Michael Koch, and he combined those two to McCall. Well, my buddy at that point looks up, bright-eyed, and he goes, I repatriated McCall. So when somebody dies, somebody just escorts their body back and all the way back to their family and all the services.
And that's called repatriating.
Yeah, and so he's like, I escorted him back. And so then those two were like, dong.
Wow.
And what are the odds of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And this is on that trip, right?
Yeah. And so now he's fully accepting of this guy.
Right.
And I'm like, there's no chance that's a coincidence. I mean, there's zero, mathematically that doesn't work. There's no chance that's a coincidence.
That's insane.
Right. And so, so he goes down there and he just has this, I mean, I'll tell you, I was a nervous wreck because I'm like,
this is your first time going down there to try it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, if my buddy dies, right here in front of me, I mean, hell of my medical license and all that. That's that's obviously gone. Yeah. But Jesus, what's it, this is scary for me too. And he goes down there and he just has this amazing transformation. I could talk about it for hours. But he transformed so much when we get back to my house. And my driveway was pretty long. It's like 100 yards long, 150 yards long maybe. And we get out of the car, and my wife's standing at the front door, and she starts bawling. Tears just, I'm like, what's happened?
Yeah.
Like something. She goes to my buddy, and she hugs him. And she's like, what happened? What happened to you? You look 20 years younger. And I was like, wow. Because I was there for it, and he felt different to me, and we talked a lot, and we giggled, and we laughed, and we remembered old times, and he's just not that dude, right?
Yeah.
He's not that guy that, that you have the type of things. And he was remembering stuff I couldn't remember from, like, when we were young and hung out together. And, and so, anyway, he has a great transformation, and he's like, I have some buddies who really need to do this. And I'm like, well, let's figure it out. And so, like, his buddy that he figured was in the most distress, who needed it the fastest, was Marcus. Mm-hmm. And so we got Marcus treatment. And I actually wasn't there for that, but my buddy who had gotten treatment was there with him for that. And then, Marcus and Amber were like, this transformation, like, we know all these people who need it. And so they start trying to get their friends treatment. And then, and I'm like helping coordinate with all this. And it's just like a total juggling act. There's no system involved.
Right.
And we're just getting funding from various places. It's like, I think for Marx's, we did like a GoFundMe, like me and my girlfriend did a GoFundMe thing, and
cool,
whatever. And so he gets back, and Amber's like, well, we got to get all these people treated. And then they started doing that. And then they said, well, like, why don't we figure out a pathway for this? And then they came up with the idea of getting doing a non-for-profit. And then they were working with the same doctor that I mentioned at the beginning, Martine. And so, and that's how the pathway started. And then they went that way for a couple hundred people, I think, over a couple
they're
of
doing
years.
Great. They're crushing.
Now they've gotten smart, and they have lobbyists, they're working on DC and all that stuff, and now they have Stanford researchers involved to, just obviously can.
And they got maps, support, and everything. And that's really cool.
So much more credible now. Yeah.
So take me back to the SEALs, dude.
Yeah.
When you dropped out of high school to go into the SEALs, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's a crazy thing. Did you play sports at all in high school?
Yeah.
What did you play? Football?
Football, ran track, did some boxing, did some martial arts.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you were ready to be physical.
Yeah. I mean, I was super physical my whole life. And that's why I was so bad at school, because I just wanted to climb things and go try to lift heavy things.
Yeah,
and
punch people.
Yeah. And wrestle, and whatever. Just like I wanted to go see if I could jump my bike over that ditch or whatever.
So when you joined the SEALs, I know Marcus was a breacher.
Yeah.
Did you have a specific position during your active years?
So a lot of stuff has shifted, like post 9/11, like the way the teams are organized and how big the units are, and they have a lot of support staff now. Like, we didn't have support staff when I was going through, and so it's a lot different now. But back then we had 16-man platoons, and which we broke into two firing squads, which were eight men each. And then so each one had an automatic weapons guy, so that you carried the M60, like the heavy machine gun. And then because we didn't have support staff, we had a radio man in our platoon. Like, everybody had to be able to use the radio. Everybody had to know how to do everything, right? But there's one guy in the platoon who was responsible for all of our radios and all of our crypto and all that stuff. And there was a guy who was responsible for all our dive gear, and so he was our dive rep, is what we called him.
Yeah.
So I was what's called the first lieutenant rep. So I maintained all the vehicles and boats and ladders and climbing equipment, and all kind of the lug wrench. The big strong guy carries the heavy machine gun, and usually does the diesel mechanic stuff too, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of I guess cliche. I'm a cliche.
I'm
a walking cliche.
You were working out though.
Yeah.
That's where you got the shoulders for sure.
Yeah.
So when you went into medical, you went to medical school after SEALs.
Yeah. So I got out in '94, and I did 2 years in junior college, just to make up, and then that was a transfer agreement to UCSD. It was like one program, and then I went to UCSD, and I majored in neuropsychology.
Yeah. What attracted you to that over other fields?
Well, one, I just thought, if for any reason I don't get into medical school, I don't have any interest in having a biology degree. And like all pre-med people are
Right.
bio degree. It's like, well, what are you gonna do? You're gonna work in a lab somewhere. It's like, a biology degree really commits you to like getting more degrees of some sort, right? Or just being a researcher or something. And so I said, well, like, I'll do something where I can. Like I was always interested in psychology, and like personal psychology to make myself better. And that's how I got interested in nutrition, and that's how I got interested in lifting weights and like biomechanics and everything, was just to make myself better. And I had a really shitty childhood, and I have a really shitty family, and like a lot of criminals, a lot of bad people in my family. And I was listening to like Tony Robbins' 30-day program when I was like 16 years old, and so I just thought, well, it's a good field to kind of make myself better in, and then there'd be something I'd be more interested in that than other than working in a laboratory with pipettes and drilling holes in mice as brains and whatever.
Yeah. And so as you got further into neuropsychology, what were the first things that really made you go down the sleep health path? Was that one of the first?
No. So the interesting thing is, like, I'm a mechanic, like by nature.
Okay.
Like I'm a super mechanical guy. I grew up in a really blue collar family, and like that was all my summer jobs were construction and plumbing and like, whatever. And I worked on cars. I used to, like, people flip houses. I used to do that with the cars. So I'd go around to like people who had old junkers in their front yard and be like, "Hey man, how much you want for that car?" And they're like, "Hey, you get it out of here. It's free, right?" And then I'd
flip it for $1,000 or whatever.
Yeah, I'll put $500 into it and sell it for $1,500.
Yeah.
Do that. And so I'd always been really mechanical. Where was I going with that?
The path. I want to know how, when you went into neuropsychology in med school.
Right. Yeah. So when I went into medical school.
Yeah.
Like I said, I worked at San Diego Sports Medicine Center the whole time I was in college, and I worked as a physical therapy assistant. And so I was really into sports medicine, but ortho is like a really mechanical version of sports medicine, right? Like, I'm using the same it's like I'm using drills and screwdrivers and and like all the same stuff I already know how to use. And like that really, and I liked the definitive nature of ortho. It's like, broken, you fix it, right? Like this is broke, I'm gonna put it back together, put some screws in.
There's a way to fix it.
It's done.
Yeah.
And it's not like, psychiatric disease is like, whoa, we're going to balance this for the next 60 years.
Right.
And so I was really attracted to that, and that was my path. That's what I was planning on doing. With the way the Navy works is they go, well, you can do your first year residency, but then you have to go out and do what they call a fleet tour. So you have to go out and either go on a ship, or if you go to flight school, then you can go work with a flight wing, and you can be what's called a flight surgeon. Mm-hmm. Or you can go to dive school, and then you can go work with divers. Well, of course, the SEAL teams would have a dive medical officer. So I went through that training in the expectation of going back to the SEAL teams. That job wasn't available, and I ended up at a submarine rescue unit right down the street. It's on Point Loma. And then, I take it back. So North Island now. And then I went to the SEAL teams as my next tour, and then I was going to go back to residency. But I got back to the SEAL teams, and SEALs are just like professional athletes, right?
Yeah.
The worst thing you can do is put them on a bench. And they have to be evaluated by doctors at a certain frequency. Yeah. And so they just lie. They go and they tell the doctor everything's right. Mm-hmm. Like, because they're not going to tell you if something's wrong. They're going to try to figure out a way to do it on their own. They're going to go on the internet and do some research and maybe buy some black market stuff. Who knows? Like, they're going to try to fix themselves because they don't want to be put on the bench. That's the worst thing you can do. That's their identity. It's their life. It's what they do. That's who they are. But because I was a SEAL, and I had a decent reputation as a SEAL, and I'd been there recently enough to where there were still a ton of SEALs there that I'd trained with and worked with. And so they trusted me, and they'd come in and shut the door and go, "Hey man, let me tell you what's really going on." Yeah. And they started listing out all these symptoms, and it was like, my motivation sucks. And it's all relative. So they're still a super motivated guy, but by their standards, motivation sucks. I'm really moody. I'm irritable. I can't concentrate. I walk in a room. I don't know what I'm. Came in, I leave. I come back. Leave, come back. I leave my house 5 times every day before I can actually before I'm actually all on my way, because I get in my car. Realize I forgot my badge. I go get my badge. I forgot.
So they trusted you. You had a position where they could come in and talk freely. Yeah. Unlike a lot of other doctors,
Right.
maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and they tell me this whole list of symptoms, which is now called the operator syndrome. They published a paper on it years after I did all this. I called it the SEAL syndrome, just because for obvious reasons. And it's just like this combination of symptoms, but it wasn't nothing reached the level of disease.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I was a Western trained medical physician. I knew how to recognize and diagnose and treat a disease. And if you have a disease, you do this. Like there's books that tell me. But if you don't have a disease and like, well, I'm not performing the way I want to, I'm losing muscle, I'm getting weaker, I'm getting fatter, I'm getting slower, I'm getting colder, I'm getting dumber, my sex drive's low, I'm emotional, I can't concentrate, I'm not motivated.
None of that requires a pill that
the
medical school would have given you.
And
right?
I'm sitting there going, I don't have any idea. I don't have any idea.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, I'm going to look into some of this alternative medicine stuff. And so I started thinking, well, maybe it's adrenal fatigue, right? Because, you've heard of shell shock from other wars and whatever. And, they like every war is called PTSD, something else, right? And so I'm like, well, maybe it's that. Maybe some kind of, it's been 8 years of combat at this point. Maybe it's some kind of combat fatigue thing. And so maybe it's adrenals. And so I started treating adrenals and that pissed off the Bureau of Medicine, Navy medicine, all the
because
leadership.
you were going outside of like the
I was doing stuff
regulations or whatever.
I was doing stuff outside of my scope, is what they call it.
Okay.
So
does that basically mean that you're not prescribing pills?
Yeah.
Because when I hear you say you're trained in Western medicine, I automatically assume it's like, oh, you have this. Here's the pills.
Right.
That you're supposed to take.
A pill or procedure, right?
Yeah.
It's like either surgery or injection or like whatever.
Or little white tablets.
Or some sort of tablet, right? Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have a clue, and I was just like, I don't know. But the good thing was, the SEALs already had become somewhat famous, and they had like this celebrity status, and so I'd watch somebody's TED Talk, or I'd see someone lecture, or I'd read their book, and I'd call them, and I'd be like, hey, my name's Dr. Parsley. I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. I was wondering if I could talk to you. I was wondering if I could come train with you. I was wondering if I could consult.
So what were some of the things that you were watching at that time that kind of fell outside of the scope, as they would say?
Yeah, so it was things like adrenal fatigue. It was things like at the time, kind of like the life extension people that kind of branched into something called A4M,
like anti-aging, almost.
So it's
within that.
Yeah. So that kind of branch of medicine, they were always doing kind of the wacky, cutting edge stuff that was all about performance. And what this really was, without me ever defining it then, was performance medicine, right? It's like they just weren't performing up to their standards.
Right.
They were pretty healthy, fit guys, right? And another thing is I just shotgunned the labs, right? I just I'm just going to test for everything because I don't know what I'm looking for. So I'm going to test for everything that I think could possibly be related. And it was literally 98 lab markers and like 17 vials of blood. And of course, the Navy got pissed off at that too because that was $2,000 a pop, and I'd done it to like 300.
Isn't that crazy that they would get pissed off that you're trying so hard to help somebody? Like, did that ever go through your mind?
Oh, for sure. And this wasn't like gentle talks. I mean, it was like you're shut down. We're investigating you to see if you've broken the law. And
what for helping people?
And I'm like, I'm just everybody's getting better. Like, look, see, right. And so, and when I did their labs, it's like every inflammatory marker was high, every oxidative marker was high, everything catabolic was high. Mm-hmm. Everything anabolic was low. Their testosterone was low. Their growth hormone was low. Their DHEA was low. Their DHT was low. And their insulin sensitivity actually sucked for guys who were as fit as they were and eating as clean as they were. And I was like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. And so I'm reading about all this stuff. Like, well, yeah, because the other thing is, for whatever reason, special forces guys can't use performance enhancing drugs. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't just replace their testosterone, which is what I'd want to do, right? It's like, well, your testosterone, you have the testosterone of an 80-year-old man and you're a 28-year-old SEAL, so let's give you the testosterone of a 28-year-old SEAL and see how you do, right?
Yeah.
But I can't do that. And the other thing is they can't be dependent upon anything. So if they're dependent upon a drug, and then they go somewhere where they can't get that drug, and like, can they do their job now, right? Or do they become a hazard to the platoon? So I had a lot of restrictions on me, and it just forced me into figuring it out. And so I don't know. I'd gone down, like I said, adrenal fatigue. I was looking for nutritional deficits. I was looking into heavy metal toxicity. I was looking into this shell shock thing that people, maybe it's a psychiatric thing. And somewhere, I don't know, 100, 150 people into it. Like the story was the exact same. I thought they were like briefing each other for a while.
Yeah, right,
I'm like,
right. They'll come in and say the same thing over and over.
And by the time the fifth guy came in my office, I could have told all the rest of them their story for them.
Yeah.
Well into it. It's embarrassing to admit how far in, I don't know, but it was a long way into it. This guy mentioned that he took Ambien every night. And I was like, it seems like that. A lot of people said that. I'm going to make a note in the margin. And then I just keep going on. And then since none of this was in their medical records, I had shadow files in my office. So I had a record for them that wasn't
your own records.
Wasn't technically their medical records.
Sure.
And I just gave it to them when I left. I'm like, hey, do with this what you want. It's supposed to go in your medical record, so you should probably do that if you want to. Right? And so I go back, and every single guy who's been in my office was on Ambien. And I was like, oh, I wonder if that could be it. Now, again, Western trained medical physician. I don't know anything about sleep.
Yeah.
I didn't have a single class on sleep.
Right.
I took pharmacology. I knew that Ambien was
what could make you sleep.
I knew that
right?
I knew that Ambien was a GABA analog.
What does that mean?
Which means it acts like GABA. And I'm like,
what is GABA?
Great. My question exactly.
Okay, cool.
I'm like,
great.
Okay, well, I know what GABA is. It's gamma-aminobutyric acid, and it's a neuropeptide. But I don't exactly know what it does. Like, there's something called gabapentin we give people who have neurological pain. It slows down nerve transmission. I know that. So it's like, okay, why are we giving them a GABA drug? And so then I realized, well, I need to know something about sleep to understand if this could be affecting this, right? And then once I started learning about sleep and what happens while you sleep, I'm like, holy crap, this could literally explain every single symptom. Because once you learn about, hey, what happens when I go to sleep? And people always ask me like that question, like, what happens when you're asleep? I'm like, well, what happens when you're awake? Everything. All the things happen when you're awake. All the things, like, there's a million things going on, but there's some very, distinct known pathways that are supposed to happen when your sleep architecture, what we call it, looks normal. And the first thing you do is this, is a long cycle of what we call deep sleep. And that's when you've heard of this lymphatics that flushes all the waste products out of your brain and it starts restoring nutrients to your brain. But it's also when all your hormones get re-regulated, right? And so it's when your stress hormones are the lowest. Cortisol, people have heard of that. Like, that's the stress hormone. The lowest your cortisol ever is when you're in deep sleep. Coincidentally, cortisol is catabolic. So fight or flight is the most catabolic state you could be in. You're using your body as a fuel source to get out of that bad situation, right? You're eating yourself. Anabolic activity is exactly the opposite. You're taking, so like anabolic could be like taking amino acids and building proteins, or like eating protein and building a muscle out of that. Yeah. Catabolic would be, I'm under a lot of stress, I'm starving, my body's going to turn my muscle into amino acids to give to other cells, right?
Wild.
So it's the exact opposite, right? So the most anabolic time is when you're in deep sleep. That's when your testosterone is secreted. That's when your growth hormone is secreted. That's when with your appetite, like your neuroregulation of appetite. That's when the systems that are set that are going to, what we call fuel partition, is going to determine what happens when you eat fat, carbohydrates, and protein. What is your body going to do with them? How likely are you to burn fat as a fuel source versus burning carbohydrates? All that's set while you're sleeping. I'm like, wow, okay. Well, that could explain the low testosterone. That could explain the low growth hormone. That could, right? And then you go through REM sleep. Like, you come out of that deep sleep, you do a little bit of REM. And the first sleep cycle is almost all deep. The last cycle, right before you wake up, is almost all REM. So it goes progressively less deep, more REM throughout the night. Well, REM sleep, that's when you're actually learning, right? So anything you learn today, you don't actually know. And if you never went to sleep, you'd forget literally everything I said today.
So that REM cycle helps you like internalize and cement it in your brain?
What it does is it forms new neurological pathways. It forms durable pathways. So there's something, if you filled your head with superfluous crap and your brain figures out that it's superfluous, and that's kind of what dreams are about. A lot of it's rehearsal of what you've seen and done during the day. And you'll trim off what's called budding, like these little new kind of pathways that are forming, and just like get rid of those. Let's make these really durable, right? And so we're going to strengthen these connections to this new bit of information. And then the more of that you do, now you have so many different ways of coming at that information. That's when you know something. That's when you actually know it. That's when you can think about it.
That's when you retain knowledge.
Yeah, and you can think about it creatively, right? Because you can come at it from all these different angles. You can associate it with stuff that no one, like, you didn't learn. Like, when somebody taught you this and this, and you didn't know any associations, or maybe you knew one association, then you can think of 50 different ones once you really know, like, well, that affects us, and it could go around, and now you know this information. It's also when you emotionally categorize. So if you have a fight with your spouse about dirty dishes in the sink, how long should that last in your brain? Like until the fight's over, right? Like as soon as you walk out of the room, it's like, whatever, like that's nothing.
Right.
But if you don't sleep well, if you have poor quality sleep and you don't get good REM sleep, you don't emotionally categorize that right. And so that could still be like a huge trigger. And then the next time you see a dirty dish, and it's like, and now you're all aggro about something that's meaningless. So we think that this is what a lot of PTSD is, because PTSD very often is very traumatic, obviously. Mm-hmm. It can be physically traumatic as well, and then things interfere with your sleep, and so now you're not sleeping well, and so something emotional already happened. Something bad happened. You saw your buddy get shot. You got in a bad car wreck. Like whatever. Like something traumatic has happened. Yeah. And you don't categorize that right, and now it's more important to you, and now it's associated with more things, and now you're getting crappy sleep. Because you're getting crappy sleep.
When all these guys were taking Ambien, does Ambien allow you to reach that REM cycle, or does it interfere with that?
Man, you're a smart guy.
I'm trying.
Like this is like you're like that's a nice.
Because if these guys have all these problems, but they're taking Ambien,
that's a nice little underhand T-ball hit. All right. So so we know how crooked the whole medical system is now. COVID has unveiled anyone. If anyone ever had any doubts, it's unveiled that how crooked everything is. So when pharma applies for approval of a drug, pharma does the research. Pharma owns the research. And then they give the FDA what they want to. And they say, well, this proves our case. Here. And they have all this stuff that
doesn't prove
their
case.
Their case is wrong.
Right. And they don't share that. They get to choose.
They get to choose.
Can the FBI request all that? Or sorry, not FBI, FDA.
There's some push and pull, but it's not much.
There's probably some
not much
collusion
because the FDA is funded by pharma.
Right, exactly.
That's where the budget comes from, right? A lot of people don't know this. The application fee for the Pfizer vaccine is $3.5 billion. Pay us $3.5 billion, and we'll let you know if we're going to approve your drug or not, right?
Sure.
All right, so, but somebody files a lawsuit, and they go to court, and now you start seeing, now you have to start pumping out all the research in court. And so now everything, now you pull up the dress and pull out the knickers, like everything.
Right, now we see
it's
it
on
all.
full display.
Right.
So that had just happened with Ambien. It had just happened like a year before all this happened, right before I ran into this. So I got to find out what really happens with Ambien, because before it was like, it's just totally safe drug. It's non-addictive. You take it, you go to sleep, you feel
it's
great.
The same type of sleep,
and you're just going to feel great, and it's the best thing out there. So and that's why all the SEALs were taking it, because they thought
it was just the same type of sleep they would get if they could sleep normally.
Yeah, and they thought it was completely benign. Like they wouldn't give every SEAL an antidepressant. They wouldn't give every SEAL like anything, but this was just like, oh yeah, it's like Benadryl or something. All right, like whatever. It's like over the counter here. They just like take it.
Right.
And so like 85% of the SEALs were taking Ambien to some degree, and a lot of them took it every single night. And if you know SEALs, if one's good, two's probably better, three's probably fantastic, and you're superhuman, so you probably need three. So they're taking way more than they should.
Damn.
And and it doesn't work. And so at some level they feel like it doesn't work, and so then they're chasing it down with cocktails and like taking 2 or 3 cocktails and there are 3 Ambien, and
as they build up a bit of a tolerance, maybe.
And then they go lay in bed, and then they wake up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and they can't get back to sleep. So like, well, I'm going to go to work and just work out really hard and not take any breaks and not rest and not take a nap, and then I'll come home and I'll be really tired tonight, and then I'll fall back asleep and I'll fall asleep again. And like, how long have you been trying that? Like 4 years.
Man,
keep going. Today's the day. Right. So that's not going to work, right? So anyway, I find out, because of the research that's come out, Ambien destroys about 80% of REM sleep and about 20% of deep sleep. Alcohol destroys about 80% of deep sleep and 20% of REM sleep. So once I got onto the sleep idea, I was like, I should do some sleep studies on these guys and see. Every single SEAL I studied had a sleep study done on 99.9%, or 99.1 to 99.9% stage 2 sleep, which we consider transitional sleep. So it's not REM and it's not deep. It's the transition in between. So when you know enough about sleep, it's hard to believe that they even survived that. Honestly, like I don't know how that.
That's what their sleeping status was when you studied them.
Yep.
Is that on Ambien?
So
or
that's
no?
that's them using their Ambien and alcohol.
Okay.
I'd like do whatever you always do. And
Okay.
Go
And
do
you
your
would
sleep
study that.
Right.
Yeah.
So then pretty quickly, I started reading the research, and I'm like, we got to get everybody off Ambien, and we got to get everybody to quit drinking so much. Like, I'm not going to try to tell SEALs not to drink, but like, I'm going to educate them on
this is what could probably happen. Yeah.
And of course, what motivates them is performance. And so I could talk to them about growth hormone and testosterone, like how all of that's regulated while you're asleep. And if you have the testosterone of a 12-year-old girl, it's because you're not releasing it when you're asleep, and you should be releasing it during sleep. And if you're drinking alcohol, you're messing with that. And if you're taking Ambien, you're messing with that. And like, and you complaining about your motivation, you're complaining about your concentration, and you're complaining about like all these cognitive things and memory. And well, you're losing that from the REM sleep. So if you're going to do that, like you're going to keep having those symptoms, and they could all identify with it. And so literally change the culture. Right. And I'm not exaggerating. This is a literal statement. I got laughed out of the leadership offices when I told them this. Like, our guys' testosterone is low because they're not sleeping. Like, okay, doc, yeah.
Wow.
You're like, we got a special one here. And they thought I was the dumbest guy on the planet. And nobody was talking about this. Like in the last 10 years, this has popped up, and like sleep experts are everywhere now. They've been talking about this. But there was nothing. I mean, if it existed, I couldn't find it. And like, I figured this stuff out as I was going along, and and I had some great mentors who were helping me. And so I just started, I'm like, well, we got to get everybody off of Ambien. So I can't say just suck it up, buttercup, like just go home and don't do that and sleep.
Yeah.
So I started doing a lot of research about, okay, well, what makes us sleep? And then you learn about circadian rhythms and the blue light, and like how that triggers the release of melatonin, and then the melatonin triggers the release of GABA, and GABA floods the brain with this peptide of GABA that slows down the neocortex. So if you think about it, when you're asleep, what's really the definition of being asleep?
Being unconscious?
No. If I knocked you out, would you be asleep? If you right?
I guess that's not. I guess I wouldn't be.
If you drink a bottle of Jack and you fell down, are you asleep? No.
Yeah.
So really the best definition of sleep is lack of wakefulness, right? Which is rhetorical. But all that really happens when you go to sleep, obviously the blue light goes down and you secrete some hormones in your brain, and your brain chemistry starts changing. That GABA slows down what we call your neocortex, which is the part of the brain that we think of when we think of a human brain, like the wrinkly bit. It's not like the brain
stem,
the midbrain and brain stem where
right.
that sits on top of it. It's just that wrinkly bit, and that's where our sensory is, and that's where our motor is. So our ability to interact with the world is in the neocortex. And then the planning ability is in the prefrontal cortex. It's the front of it, right? And so that's where all of our executive skills come from. And then all of our sensory and all of our ability to interact with the world comes from the neocortex. Well, what happens when you're asleep is the neocortex quits paying attention to the world, right? That's all it is. So you can still hear, you can still see, you can still smell, you can still taste, but you don't, right? You're not processing it. It's still happening, but I can flip on a light and wake you up because your eyes still work, right?
Yeah,
and I can make a loud noise and I'll wake you up because your ears are still working. You're just not paying attention to it. So there's this barrier between you and your environment. And so, if there's a barrier between you and your environment, and you can be awakened, and then you have predictable neurological changes, like your brainwave patterns change in a predictable pattern, and then we can say, okay, you're asleep.
Yeah.
So I started doing research about like, okay, well, what leads to that, and what leads to that, and what's and so the melatonin production was huge.
Yeah.
The melatonin is Matt Walker calls it the starter pistol, right? It's like just initiation. It doesn't make you sleep. It starts everything to make you sleep. But if you're nutritionally deficient or neurologically deficient in certain neuropeptides or certain neurotransmitters, or your neurotransmitters have changed and your receptors to those have changed, and like you still might not be able to sleep even though melatonin got secreted, right? So that's why melatonin isn't like the end all be all. And then melatonin is a hormone, so you don't want to give somebody a bunch of a hormone because then they quit producing that hormone. And even if they don't quit producing it to a significant degree, the receptors for it go away if you give them more than their brain would actually normally have. And from the time the sun goes down until the time you wake up in the morning, it's only like 6 micrograms of melatonin over like an 8 to 12 hour period. So if you just take a 1 milligram tablet and it all goes in your brain at once, like you've overdosed by 20-fold already, right?
Okay.
And you see 50 milligram tablets
Damn,
out
yeah.
there.
I have melatonin in the cover that's like
Right.
10. Yeah.
Right. So, so I'm like, well, like guys should take melatonin. And then this was also around the time that vitamin D3 was really getting some notoriety for all of its benefits. And we knew that vitamin D3 deficiency impaired sleep too. So you should take vitamin D3. And then I found out, well, all the vitamin D3 reactions require magnesium. So we better give you magnesium. And then of course, magnesium is calming too and a lot sedating. So that'll be good for sleep. And then, well, how do you make melatonin? Well, that starts with tryptophan, and that's what the whole tryptophan.
So you were coming up with this cocktail through your research. You were finding these different sleep elements.
Are you sure you haven't
right?
You've read ahead in the book. So,
a little bit.
Yeah. All right,
but you were, that's basically what you were doing, right? You were trying to find like a more holistic approach instead of Ambien.
And the SEALs called it the sleep cocktail.
Hilarious.
It's like Doc Parsley sleep cocktail. Right?
Is that what they called it?
That's what they called it.
Okay, cool.
And so it was 7 different ingredients, and this was pre-Amazon. So they were going to all these different health stores all over town, and they're buying this in capsules and this in powder and this
based
in
on what
liquid.
you were telling them.
Right.
Okay.
And then, and then they're traveling and running out of stuff, and then it was a total pain in the ass. And so once I got out, they were just haranguing me to make a product out of it. Like, come on, just make us a product so we can do this. And I'm like, I'm a doctor. Like, I don't know. Like, what do I know about this?
Yeah.
And so finally, I'm like, all right, I'll do it. But I'm just going to take a year off of my clinic. I'm just going to take a year off. I'm going to start this supplement line for you guys, and then I'm going to build this thing, and then I'll sell it to the Navy, and then I'm going to go back to being a doctor,
practicing,
doing what I'm doing. And that's 9 years ago. So anyway, I make it all, and I put it in one of those foil stick pouches. So that guys can just grab a handful of them, put them in their pocket, and they can get wet and they can get hot and whatever. It doesn't mess with anything. And they mix it with water and they take it and helps people sleep. And I got but while they were in, it was just everybody going to buy all their own stuff, but I had great results, and they were helping me figure out the dosage because I didn't know, the research on that's crap.
You were doing this during your year away from practice? No.
So this is when I'm actually in the SEAL teams. Like when I'm working with them to get them off of Ambien. Yeah. We're figuring out how much of everything to take, and like we fine tuned it maybe over a year. And then, and so that's what everybody was taking. And then it was just a handout. And I gave lectures all the time. People took the handout, and people just went and they bought it, and like they traveled with it. And then I got out, and then they harangued me. Yeah. So I started the product, and to your point, because I'm a doctor, I'm not a marketer, and I don't know these things, I named it Doc Parsley Sleep Cocktail.
Well, it's a great name. I think you nailed it.
Yeah. And apparently that's a terrible marketing name. Because,
it is?
Yeah, because cocktail gets...
sleep cocktail.
It gets blocked.
The Cosby cocktail. Yeah.
And so
then the first thing people think of.
It gets blocked on all these... It gets firewalled from like all the universities and
hilarious.
From the DOD. And like, I'm like, all right, well, that wasn't a great idea. And I had a little cocktail glass on it with a caduceus in it. And so,
oh my God.
So people thought that it was actually a cocktail. And I had tons of people, civilians that bought it later that I would meet, who told me they were mixing it with their cocktail.
Oh no.
And they're like, I put it in my martini. It's great. It's like, it turns my martini into apple martini. And I'm like, no,
don't do that.
You didn't read anything, I guess? You just like bought because all my lectures and all my blogs were about sleep hygiene and about alcohol. And And they just bought the product. And so I renamed it Sleep Remedy.
Okay,
and
cool.
So that's what it is.
And you took away the martini glass.
Yeah. And we got rid of the martini glass. And so
that's hilarious.
And so that's how that all came about, and that's how I figured out that that's what was happening. So when I got them all off of Ambien without doing anything else, their testosterone doubled, maybe tripled. Their free testosterone would go up. Their estrogen was really high, right? And reasons we could get into if you want to. And I needed to bring their estrogen down. So zinc citrate can do that to some degree. There's a pharmaceutical called a Remedex that'll do that. It's a breast cancer drug to reduce estrogen. Completely benign, like you take one tablet a week. And so that's another thing I got in trouble for, doing this
off the books,
label
right.
treatment, and then
what the first launch of the sleep cocktail, what you said around 9 years ago ish, is that when you were in the thick of working on it?
I launched it at PaleoFX in 2014.
So were you
with Rob Wolf?
When you were doing all the research to try and help guys get off Ambien?
Yeah.
Were you? Where did psychedelics fold in for you? Had you had experience with that, and was that within your scope?
No. So when I was helping guys with sleep, I mean, they came in my office pretty much right away. Like right when I got there in 2009, I got there in the summer of 2009. So I'd say within the first few months, they started coming in with their problems, and I was treating it as adrenal fatigue and maybe nutritional things, and trying to help figure out how can we raise their testosterone with supplements and things like that. And I think I started using the Arimidex then, and then I came onto the sleep idea probably 2010, and then during that year we figured out how much of everything to take, and we've added we added stuff over the next year, and I've added another ingredient since I've gotten out of the Navy and all that too. And so then I did that 11 and 12, and I got out in January of 13. So it was like really 2011, 2012 was just me practicing there with them, doing performance medicine and continually getting in trouble and getting shut down and having my privileges stripped while they looked into whether or not what I was doing was crazy and all that. And then I got out, went into clinical practice with the doctor who said, would you go to medical school? Like that guy, right. He had a concierge practice, and
nice.
And he wanted me to take it over from him, and I was supposed to be his successor, and it was going to be this beautiful thing. Didn't turn out to be what I wanted to do, but so I did a year of clinical with him. They kept haranguing me, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a year off of this because it wasn't my practice. I can always come back, right? I was like, I'm just going to take a year off or do super minimal, and I just did consulting, which is basically what I do with the SEALs, but I do it for wealthy people who can afford for me to kind of be their health coach, right? So it's all performance based stuff, really. So I'm like, well, I'll live off of consulting. Like I just started this sleep supplement with my Rob Wolf and Peter Attia. I don't know if you know either one of those guys. And like we just all threw in a little bit of money. Like we started the whole company for like $100,000 or something, and like in the black immediately, and like, oh, that thing's gonna be great. It's gonna take off, and I'm going back to what I'm doing. But again, as soon as I got out, I left a vacuum because the next doctor they put in there was Joe Blow doctor, who didn't know any of the things that I knew, and
very traditional,
wasn't going to look into it, was in a hurry to get back to the hospital to finish his residency, where I had completely destroyed my career. I had no chance of getting back into any Navy residency because of all the trouble I'd stirred up. And I don't know why it was surprising to them, because the leadership kept telling me I couldn't treat SEALs special because they were SEALs, and I was like, yeah, I can actually, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. And they're like, you can't do that, and I'm like, well, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I don't know what else to tell you, but those are my brothers, right? And it's in their name, Special Forces, right? Like they get special treatment, and they're like, no, you have to treat everybody. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. So like, I cut my own throat with that. But it was fine. And so I 2012 is when McCall got out. And then I saw him later that year, like towards the end of that year, right before I got out of the Navy. And he, told me his story of the ayahuasca and all that. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then I got out, and a few months after I got out, my buddy's problem happened, and we went down and did the Ibogaine.
And that was your first experience with psychedelics? Was that Ibogaine trip?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, so when Martine and the guy talked to me about it, I wasn't sure that it would be useful at all, but I was curious, just because I'm a curious guy, and I definitely didn't feel like I had all the answers, because
good. That is the mark of a good doctor.
Obviously,
a curious doctor who doesn't think he has all the answers is a good doctor.
And I think a plant that evolved to be on the planet at the same time as us, having medicinal benefit, is probably a lot smarter than something we create in the lab. And I don't even know why it should be regulated. And if you look at the FDA's charter, they're not supposed to be able to regulate anything like that. So if you can just pick something and eat it,
Yeah.
and not do anything else, or just ingest it, then it's considered a food, and it can't be a drug. It can't be regulated. But you can do that with marijuana, right? You can just go grab marijuana and eat it and then have an effect. But marijuana is illegal. And if it exists in nature unaltered, then it's also not a drug. But testosterone is a drug. Mm-hmm. Testosterone is a controlled drug because people use it to cheat in sports. Estrogen is same damn thing. It's a sex hormone, but nobody uses that to to cheat in sports. Whatever. Like, we don't need to regulate that one. But this testosterone stuff and that growth hormone stuff, like, we got it right. So it's all political. It's all a bunch of shit. Mm-hmm. But when they talked to me about the Ibogaine, they also talked to me about the 5-MeO-DMT. Mm-hmm. And they told me how it was this universal oneness experience and, complete ego death. And I was like, well, I'd be interested in doing that. Yeah. I don't know if I have an ego or not. I assume I do. Like, let's check this out. And so they sent somebody to my house that night, and I did 5-MeO-DMT.
Oh, no way.
Which was illegal. Obviously, I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
But,
what was the? Did this person have like a pretty rich history of leading people in that space?
Yeah, it was a facilitator that worked with them. So their Ibogaine experience has a 5-MeO component. So you do Ibogaine, you have a gray day, and then the next day you do 5-MeO. Yeah. And so they sent that girl to my house, and I was like, wow, like, that was amazing. So I was in favor of it. I didn't know enough about it to be telling people they should do it or shouldn't.
Right,
do things.
But you had a great time with your first experience.
Yeah, and then I had a great time with that, and then that regulated itself, and then maybe a year later I did ayahuasca, and made all kinds of mistakes with that. So, I walked out of ayahuasca and got a divorce, and got into a relationship with a woman I did ayahuasca with. She got a divorce too, and then that fell apart real quickly, as one could imagine. So
okay, hang on.
Yeah.
So you went on an ayahuasca trip, and during your experience, what came to you to make such a drastic change in your life?
I was already.
That's a pretty intense. Unless you were already on that path.
I was already on that path with my wife because.
So it wasn't like you said, "Bye, hon, love you, see you in a couple weeks," and then you come back and drop that.
It wasn't because there was anything bad between us. She was from Australia, and she was older than me, so she came over here. She was in her late 40s when she came over here. And everything was in Australia, and all, like, her whole culture, everything was there. And then I lived this, isolated existence. So, like, when I was in the Navy, of course, I don't have any control of my time, so I didn't really get to see her much. And then once I got out and started doing this entrepreneurial gig, like, I was traveling and all this stuff. And so she was just kind of depressed all the time. And I was just like, you should just move back to Australia, And she was spending half the year in Australia anyway. And I'm just like, let's just get your house and you go to Australia. And so we just bought her a house in Australia, and she was down there, like, moving into this house. And so, like, we had discussed it. We hadn't, like, made the final decision that we were going to get divorced.
Sure.
But, I mean,
it was on track.
I mean, the writing was on the walls. Like, you're going to be depressed as long as you're here. Yeah. I'm going to feel bad if you're depressed because you want to be with me. Like, I don't want somebody to be depressed because they want to be with me. Like, I admire that, like, that stick-to-itiveness there. Yeah. But, like, I don't want that. Like, I feel terrible that you're depressed and you're just doing it to be with me. Like, this feels awful. So, like, so that was coming. And this thing was actually supposed to be a business thing, which was, now that I know about psychedelics, was a stupid idea. But the idea was, you go there and you free up your mind, you get rid of your limitations with somebody you're trying to do in business with, and, like, you figure out how to gel better or to break through in your business, whatever. And so this woman and I were working on starting a supplement line together, because I already had kind of a supplement company, right? I have, like, a product, but I know a lot about how to make a supplement and sell a supplement.
So that was the intention that you brought into the trip.
She had this brand that was like health and wealth, and so I was going to be the health component, and she was going to be, and that was kind of our business idea. Okay. And then it turned into this romantic idea under the influence of ayahuasca.
Wow.
So then I did psilocybin a little bit later. And again, one of my primary reasons for doing ayahuasca was because McCall had done it, and I wanted to see if that was an alternative for the SEALs, right? Because there's not that many places to do Ibogaine, and it's a big time commitment, and you can get a lot of ceremonies of ayahuasca in the United States because they can do it under churches and whatever. And
Right.
that's how we did it. And so I went to experiment kind of for that reason too. And I was like, it was super traditional, and they had the gongs and chicken bones and the mantle and like all the crystal bowls and chanting. And I was like, no, the seals will tie that guy up and put him in the corner. like that. This is not going to work. It's not going to work. But it actually did work. Later they started doing some. I know.
So you went down there. You tried ayahuasca. Later, you tried psilocybin. Did you try any other psychedelics as a path of curiosity?
I've done MDMA. Mm-hmm. I have not done ketamine, but
LSD.
Yeah, I haven't done a heroic dose with LSD, but I've tried microdosing that for a long time, and I didn't really get anything that I could appreciate out of it. So I never went any further with that one.
But through these efforts of like testing these different substances, was one of your main intentions to see how these substances could fit into the world of health and treatment from your doctor's perspective?
Primarily for the SEALs, right?
Yeah.
Because I also never finished my Navy stories. The last year that I was in there, it wasn't 100% solution for 100% of the people, but it was an 80% solution for 80% of the guys, at least, maybe 90% of the guys. And there was a cohort that I just couldn't help nearly as much. Got everybody off of sleep drugs, and it helped everybody. But I went to a medical conference, and this guy was talking about TBI, and I knew I had one TBI patient. I knew I had at least one.
TBI is?
Traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
And when you have traumatic brain injury, often you can't sleep.
Yeah.
And so this guy had been sent back to me from training because he hadn't slept in a week, and he was hallucinating while they were doing live fire drills, and he was hallucinating and running into fire and putting gas in diesel trucks and like just so he came, and I worked with him to help get him to sleep. And then so I was curious because I was like, oh, I know he has a TBI, because we got him back into his platoon. He deployed, and he almost got hit by an RPG. Came within like 18 inches of his head and hit the wall right behind him. Shit. And then he couldn't sleep again. They sent him back. And so I'm like, I know I have at least one guy with a TBI. And then McCall he'd been a vehicle that hit an IED, and so I knew he had a TBI. And so I'm like, well, maybe there's some TBI stuff I can learn, because these conferences, like, you never know what's going to be a good lecture, and oftentimes you just have to pick because 3 are going on at the same time. So I decided I'll go to this TBI lecture, and it's this doctor named Mark Gordon who's out here, and he's done a lot of work in this area, and he was studying pugilists, so MMA fighters and boxers and kickboxers and things like that, and NFL guys, and he was talking about the symptoms of TBI, which sounded a hell of a lot like the symptoms of my guys. And then he starts throwing up his case reports, all the hormonal changes. And so when he starts throwing up his labs, I'm like, this is the exact same lab patterns I have. So I pull hey, I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. And I become friends with Mark Gordon, and I learn from him, and I start going home and doing my own research, and I learn the threshold for a minor traumatic brain injury. So, and this is super minor. This wouldn't be clinically significant, but there's a study called a DTI where they can really see like a single neuronal tract breaking, and so that was a very minor TBI. But they found that on the acceleration changes of a roller coaster. So that was in JAMA, August of 2009, I believe. And I'm like, whoa. And I knew we had tested a lot of our equipment, because we knew that G-forces were a problem, right? We knew there's concussive blows. There's like getting hit. That's a different kind of TBI than like this overpressurization stuff, right? And so I start looking at that, and I'm like, holy smokes, like I don't have a single guy who doesn't have a TBI. So you think about it, the overpressurization is slightly different. So if you get hit in the head, right, your brain moves, and your brain can hit your skull and bounce back and hit the other side of the skull, and it sloshes around and it can break. Well, a blast, it's just like if we overpressurized this room and it went from that door out that window, that blast goes through our brain too, right? And with is it slow speed or fast video, they can.
Yeah, like slow-mo?
They can do really slow-mo if it's like really high resolution.
High
whatever.
frames per second.
So high frames per second, right? So they made an exact model of a brain, an exact model of a skull. And then they put cameras in it, and they could see what was happening. Because the skull they made of translucent material, so they could see the brain. What happens when the blast wave comes through, just what you would think, right? When the blast wave hits that camera, it affects that camera in a different way than it affects you, than different than that, right? Because it's different densities. So everything that's a different density gets affected differently. Well, your skull's different density than the dura, the lining of your brain, and that's a different density than the blood vessels, and that's a different density than the white matter, and that's a different.
So
density
everything gets
than the
affected differently.
So everything moves across, and it shears.
Oh, wow.
So it damages all the interface. So when SEAL suicide, which is frighteningly common now, when SEALs and former SEALs suicide, a lot of them are doing shoot themselves in the chest thing now and getting their brains biopsied and all this. And so we've studied all this. And so, the CTE of the NFL is a very kind of common predictable pattern, and it looks like this, right? And when a pathologist does the brain slices, like we see these proteins build up here, and you see these things. Well, what happened when we started doing it with the SEALs is like the entire brain had these tau proteins, like these things. They're beta amyloid, which is like basically just your body's way of protecting you from chronic inflammation is to put some sort of shield over it, right? So atherosclerosis is like you have chronically inflamed lining of your blood vessel, and your immune system gets tired of fighting it, and they just lays calcium over it, right? Because you just put a brick wall up there, and now you don't have to deal with it anymore, right? And if you've ever heard of like a bone spur, like, oh, he has a bone spur on his knee. It's like, there's no such thing as a bone spur, right? You can grow a bone somewhere. What happened? You had a chronically inflamed tendon or chronically inflamed ligament, and your body just decided, well, we're tired of dealing with this. Let's just put a calcium wall around it, and then it looks like
it looks
this
like a little
taper
edge.
off.
Yeah.
This tendon now looks like a little bone spur.
Yeah.
And so your brain does that with proteins, and so it's like chronically inflamed, so it just like starts laying down proteins. Well, we had it around the entire brain because of all the interfaces. So where the blood vessels met the brain, where the lining of the brain met the brain, where the white matter meets the gray matter, or the gray matter meets the vesicles, where the fluid-filled parts of it.
So all these things in the brain are getting shocked by high pressure events, and you see this in the SEALs' brains a lot. So is the theory that some of these medicines can help restructure and assist in the physical healing process?
Yeah. So I mean, the way I look at it is all TBI is brain damage. It's brain inflammation, right? So it's not necessarily, we can't necessarily look at it like a stroke and say, well, you have this area of dead brain tissue, but we can say chronic inflammation, you have all these proteins laying around which show that area is damaged, right? Well, when you get inflammation in the brain, one of the things that's very common, actually when you get inflammation anywhere, is you lose blood supply to it. And so one of the ways that we really help people is with hyperbarics, and that was at the end, and because you can get hyperbarics to places you don't have blood vessels. Well, the TBIs and the SEAL teams was part of the trauma of the job. They have very traumatic jobs. If a SEAL retires, the average SEAL gets, I think, 13 surgeries before they retire. And then these blast injuries, which I said was like 1.1 G, essentially was the very mild TBI. Well, when they're shooting machine gun just in a concrete room, just like doing CQC, every pull of the trigger of an M4 is 35 Gs, and you have 4 guys in the room doing 35 Gs 5-6 times and going into the next room. Our fast boats transit, like DevGroup's fast boats, they transit in like 65 Gs of compression, like every time. That's an average, and they peak over 100 Gs. A hard parachute opening can be 3 or 4 Gs. Our anti-tank weapons, the Carl Gustav, the guy shooting it gets 200 Gs. The guy spotting it gets 300 Gs.
Oh my God!
Like being in the back of a Humvee with a 50 cal machine gun, 65 Gs with every bullet. And
so all of that messes up the brain so much, and then it leads to all these symptoms that guys will come in with.
Well, the brain regulates all of your hormones. And the brain regulates, of course, all of your neurotransmitters. And then all of your neurotransmitters and your hormones and your blood supply dictate what regions of your brain communicate well and which regions of your brain operate well. And so when you start damaging that, like exactly what are you going to get? I don't know, but we can predict it. And I can tell you what they complain of. Like, can I tell you, well, that's because the VTA wasn't connected to the nucleus accumbens correctly because of this neurotransmitter and that downregulator. And like, no, I can't go that far. But when you put in something like Ibogaine specifically, super complex drug, it literally stimulates every region of the brain, like every neurotransmitter, the receptors for every neurotransmitter. Regions of your brain communicate that have never communicated before. Never. Right? Or maybe when you were a baby, right? And when we're young, we know what we call neuroplasticity, right? Neuroplasticity just means that your brain can change easily. Kids,
and as you get older, that becomes
we
less
become
and less.
more rigid, right?
Yeah.
So I'm a grumpy old man now, not because I'm 52 years old, but because my brain is way more rigid.
So does Ibogaine assist in?
Yeah. So what happens when you do Ibogaine? You change all the neurotransmitters, you change all the receptors to that. You actually stimulate regions of the brain that produce things like dopamine, and stimulate regions of the brain that there's something called a glial-derived neurotropic factor, and that helps repair the brain. And then you've heard of BDNF, like brain-derived neurotropic factor, and that helps repair the brain. And that, by repairing the brain, means we're getting rid of the inflammation, but we're also growing blood vessels, and we're balancing the neurotransmitters, making sure that all the neurons are doing their job and receiving what they should and promoting what they should. And now you become more plastic. Your brain becomes more plastic. And there's several neurotransmitters, and so basically, the more growth factors you have in your brain, and I can think of maybe 4 off the top of my head. There's probably 7 or 8. The more growth factors you have, the more plastic your brain is, right? Because those things are stimulating your brain to change, and that's all it means, is that you can easily change your brain. And so Ibogaine stimulates the brain like crazy, makes it plastic as hell. And in fact, so something like, you think for something like heroin, somebody becomes a heroin addict, like how quickly do they change, right? Could you make that amount of change in you without drugs? No. Heroin makes your brain really neuroplastic, right? Like your brain's very easily remolded because you're doing things to your brain that your brain has never done before. And so, like,
in a bad way.
In a bad way.
Yeah.
And so you're developing all these new pathways, and brain, this region of your brain's growing, and this region of your brain's shrinking, and then anything that you do while you're under the influence of that becomes sort of your default mode network, right? You've heard of that phrase. It's just like your little rigid pathway. So you start thinking this way and behaving this way, and then you do those things, and then your brain starts going, oh, this is how we operate now. And now that becomes your addicted behavior that you can't ever break, because you've just remodeled your brain to be a heroin receiving machine and run off of it. And like, how do you get rid of that now? And that's why something like Ibogaine helps with opiate addiction, because it makes your brain plastic again, but through different ways. And so now you can change your behavior. You can occupy a lot of those receptors that are causing addiction, like things like dopamine receptors. Those are agonists.
Oh, you can occupy them instead of occupying them with something like heroin.
Ibogaine is what we call an agonist. Like when I said that Ambien is a GABA analog. It's also called a GABA agonist. So it acts like GABA, but it's 1,000 times stronger than GABA.
Yeah.
Well, Ibogaine does that to your brain, all your neurotransmitters. So it becomes an agonist at every receptor, and it stimulates every single region of your brain, and your brain becomes more neuroplastic than it's probably been since you were 10 years old or 12 years old or something. Now you have the opportunity to make changes. Now, the other thing that it does, you've heard, are you familiar with the amygdala?
Say it again.
So it's like the alarm system, they call it the brain. So it's like walnut size, you have one on each side of your brain. And this is what our ancestors passed on to us, is this alert system. So our ancestors were walking around, they catch like this black, orange, and white stripe pattern out of the corner of their eye.
They're alerted.
Fight and flee, right? Like, man, they're on it, right? And so it senses danger, right? But that's also the stress system, right? So if you're worried about your divorce, if you're worried about your bankruptcy, if you're worried about your...
It's coming from the amygdala.
Right. So the amygdala stimulate, and ours are just revved up all the time. And that leads to the release of stress hormones. Stress hormones keep you more alert in proportion to your environment. Fight or flight is maximum stress hormones, maximum cortisol, maximum amygdala tone. Well, if you spend 20 years as a SEAL and you're getting in gunfights all the time, jumping out of planes, blowing stuff up and getting hurt all the time, like your amygdala tone is really high.
Yeah.
And you walk around all the time, super alert, checking, looking at people's hands, looking at people's eyes, looking at that. What was that sound? What was this, right? And so super revved up fight or flight system. All of the psychedelics, this is a pretty new paper, maybe 4 or 6 months ago came out. So at MDMA, ketamine, LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine, and of course 5-MeO and any other type of DMT. Kind of ayahuasca and ibogaine do a lot of their effect through DMT. A lot of them have a lot of their effect through DMT. But anyway, functional MRI show a decrease of amygdala activity 90%
after one
session. So MDMA only while you're on it.
Yeah.
And about an hour afterwards, you're back to normal. Ketamine, a week, 2 weeks, maybe up to a month.
And it's probably different if it's a therapy session with follow-up with therapists,
Yeah. Of course, the environment.
But just talking about the intake of the medicine.
Yeah. And
sure.
So like the one of the effects that we can measure, and the problem is the brain is so damn complex, and something like ibogaine is affecting every part of your brain.
Yeah.
We're never going to figure that drug out. We're never going to figure it out. Like, we're going to be learning stuff about that.
Still haven't figured out the brain.
Yeah. I mean, we don't know how the brain works well enough to even understand it. If we could understand exactly how it's affecting every single, like every single cleft in our brain, like where every neuron transmits to another neuron, it's all, every one of those are affected by this drug. So MDMA does it while you're on it. Ketamine does it for a week, maybe up to a month, depending on how much you do. LSD, I can't remember, but psilocybin does it for a little bit longer. Ayahuasca does it for a little bit longer. Ibogaine does it for even longer. So now you have a neuroplastic brain, a brain that you can actually change, and you've gotten rid of 90% of your fear. And you've been shown all of these introspective things, and you know what to work on. So it's easier to do the work if you aren't walking around with the amygdala tone all the time, right?
Wow,
you're not walking around with all the stress.
Okay.
Right. So you've done that.
It's easier to do the work, right?
Right. And those neurotropic factors I was talking about that help you remodel your brain, hence like those essentially that means neuroplasticity, right? The more of those you have, the more neuroplasticity you have, the more you can remodel your brain and change the way things communicate. So ibogaine does that more than anything else, and it lasts longer than anything else. So ibogaine can be in your system for up to 9 months after taking it. It's lipid soluble. It dissolves in. It'll store in your subcutaneous fat. And so if you do like zone 2 kind of cardio, like walking or like light jogging, whatever, you start oxidizing some fat as your fuel source, and you're actually microdosing ibogaine, and then your brain, is keeping the concentrations of that up in there. So it's keeping your brain plastic, and it's keeping your stress levels low, and it's keeping those neurotropic factors in there. And if we can add something like hyperbarics in there, and we can grow some new blood vessels, and we can maybe repair your hormones, and like testosterone is a great anti-inflammatory, and it's an anti-inflammatory in the brain, but it also helps stimulate new blood vessel growth. And
so you can do you're creating a cocktail again, because you're saying there's all these different pieces put together. So as a Western trained doctor, it seems really rare for all of these things to start coming into kind of the forefront of medicine. Do you see a space for psychedelics to enter into the mainstream medicine conversation? Because they're trying right now, with things like PTSD treatment. MAPS is working on their MDMA branding to put it out.
There's more stigma of anything that's been an illicit drug ever, right? Yeah. So that it's going to be more difficult. Saying that says nothing about the science. The science of it is probably the most promising thing out there for the brain.
So how can we get the science to overcome the stigma?
Money.
Yeah.
So you had to get the money in there. And like Fauci just proved to us, if you're not studying what we want you to study, or you're not coming up with the right conclusions, if you do study those things, then you aren't getting the money to study that anymore. And so and then pharma has to be able to make money off of it. Well, pharma can't make any money off of ibogaine, because like they're going to have to like figure out, well, the really active molecule is this one, and if we change it a little bit, we can make an analog of it that works even better, and now we can sell that as a drug. That's far-fetched. That's not that likely to happen. That's kind of what they tried to do with marijuana. Marinol, they called it, and they tried to basically make marijuana capsules, and it didn't work at all. They didn't do anything. But you could smoke marijuana and get the effect, or you could eat marijuana and get the effect. So I think they're too complex for pharma to jump in there. But this time around, we're getting a lot more social acceptance. Now, keep in mind, all of these drugs have been used for thousands and thousands of years. So it's like, society's going in
That's
cycles.
The crazy thing, is that we've had these plant medicines for longer than we've had any pharmaceutical drug.
Right.
And yet they're stigmatized and pushed down in research.
People get in charge, and people get incentivized by certain behaviors to get money and to get power, and the society starts drifting that way. And so it's cyclic. And I think we have a better chance this time. Like in the 60s, when all of this was really starting, I think it was a newscaster, like a really famous newscaster's son took LSD or something, and then like ran out into traffic, and then it was like, well, all these psychedelic drugs kill everybody,
make you jump off a bridge,
whatever, and so
fly,
then it shut down immediately. Like there was a ton of research going on with psychedelic drugs, and it just bam ended immediately, no more. Kind of like COVID. Bam, we've decided this. Now you're going to wear a mask and be 6 feet apart. Bam, social distancing is a thing, right? And so I don't know where that goes. I hope, but I feel like this time we have a better chance. I feel like there's I know a ton of wealthy people. That my clients are wealthy people, and I know a ton of influential people, and they are all about this. Like you saw the gala, there's a lot of powerful people who are behind this now. So barring any sort of tragic event where somebody does something stupid under the influence of one of these drugs, and they're doing it in a poor setting, or has a psychotic break, or somebody dies of a heart attack taking while they're on ibogaine or something, like, who knows how the political spin of that could go, and if that could
even though people die all the time from pharmaceutical drugs, and
people die from Tylenol more than anything, almost, right? But I think psychedelics and peptides, and then just lifestyle, right? That's where medicine's going. Like if you really want to live a long time, and I can't guarantee you'll live longer, but if you really want to have like a lot of life in your years, I can't guarantee you more years of life.
If you want to optimize.
But if you want your life to be like, hey, I'm performing, and then bam, I fall off a cliff and I die, like immediately, right? And I don't like get worse and worse and worse over a 30-year period. That's going to be regenerative medicine, and psychedelics I consider regenerative medicine for the brain, right? And peptides are regenerative for the brain as well, but we can also use peptides to affect hormones, and we can use peptides to affect repair of muscles and tendons and ligaments and organs, and fight off cancer and immune system, boost our immune system, and alter our immune system, and it's doing that a lot through hormones as well. So again, it's like what we're designed to have. Well, you hear about these peptides, and BPC 157 is a great anti-inflammatory. It's like, well, you already have BPC 157 in your body, right? And we're just like super concentrating it, right? So it's a peptide that's already there, right? And a lot of these things are that way, and growth hormone is like 191 amino acids long, and you can cut that into like 17 different peptides that all have the effects of growth hormone, by the way. Not all the effects of growth hormones, but like this effect of growth hormone is done by these peptides. And so I think understanding that, so it's basically taking medicine down to a cellular model. So how are we affecting the DNA of the cell, right? So every cell has the same DNA, right? But your liver cell isn't the same as your skin cell, isn't the same as a muscle cell. So why is that? Well, it's because what's being expressed in that cell, that's the epigenetics, right? And we can control epigenetics, like nutrition, sleep. If you short yourself 2 hours of sleep, you have 750 some odd changes of epigenetic expression the next day.
How many hours of sleep should somebody be getting every day? 8 hours. If you only get 6, can you make up for it by getting 10 the next day?
Nope.
You can't. Are you sure?
Okay.
I will believe you.
You can. Let me qualify this.
Okay.
If you break your leg, can you repair it?
Yes.
Okay. Is it 100% repaired? Is there any sequelae? Is there
well, the old wives' tale is that your bones grow back stronger after you break them.
And if I looked at it in an X-ray, I would see a little lump there because it's thicker, right? So So there's something different.
Okay.
All right. So there's a little change. Maybe that's a little damage, but it's stronger. The bone's back, right?
Yeah.
Sleep deprivation is the same thing. You damaged yourself. While you're awake, you're using up all your resources.
Yeah.
Right? And you're catabolic.
Yeah.
Right? I was telling you about that. You're catabolic. You're using yourself as your fuel source and throughout the day, and you're using your brain and you're using your muscles and you're using yourself as a fuel source, and you're getting through the day, and you can only last about 16 hours before you have a buildup of adenosine. So ATP is the fuel source of every cell. ATP is adenosine with 3 phosphate groups, and then you break off a phosphate and you get energy, another one, and then when you break off all 3, it's just adenosine, and that's the sleep pressure. That's what builds up in our brain and makes us go, God, I got to sleep, right? Well, that's just kind of like an analog, because that's not the only thing that's going wrong, right? That's not the only thing being depleted, but it's your brain's way of going, okay, well, we know when we have this much adenosine, we need to fall asleep. So it turns out, contract you're born into, you're going to die. Guaranteed. Nobody gets out of this alive. And while you're an adult, at least, we'll say more, it's different when you're a child, but once you become an adult, it takes 8 hours to recover from 16 hours of being awake. Now, if you run an ultra marathon, you probably need 12 hours of sleep, right?
Okay.
Or, if you hardly do anything, maybe you can, have 7 hours of sleep, right? But basically the contract is 16 awake, 8 asleep. Now, every hour you go past that 16 hours of being awake, we can measure decrements, and we can measure inflammatory, we can measure cognitive decline, decision-making going down, and we can parallel it with being drunk, right? So a performance of a blood alcohol level of 0.08 is only being awake for 24 hours. And you perform like somebody who's right on that limit. If you stay up for 2 days, you perform just like somebody who has a blood alcohol level of 0.2, right? Just sloppy drunk, right?
Yeah.
All right. And we've all been there. Like, if you've been that sleep deprived, you realize you're a moron.
Can't
like,
get behind
you're
the wheel.
saying all kinds of, you're saying stupid stuff,
you're
right? You're loopy, right? And so, you went past where you should have.
Yeah.
You've had more inflammation. You've used fuel sources you didn't technically have. You've robbed Peter to pay Paul. You've done some damage. Maybe you've started to form a little protein to fight off some inflammation here, whatever. Now I can recover the next night, get my sleep back, maybe sleep 10 hours, and like you said, and I restore myself, and I feel better, right? So all that really happened was I was awake for 18 hours instead of 16 hours, right? The morning still came at the same time. I still had to get up and do everything. So the next night I slept extra to try to help me repair from some of that I didn't get to. The whole point of me sleeping 8 hours tonight is to repair everything that I damaged today, and to prepare for tomorrow. Store up everything, put all my neurotransmitters and hormones and glycogen stores and everything where they need to be, so that when I get up tomorrow, I'm the best I can possibly be to handle my day. If I could do that perfectly, I wouldn't age, right? Because I'd wake up every day exactly the same. Yeah. But if I choose to sleep 6 hours, I'm choosing to age 25% faster.
What about people who say they sleep 4 hours a night, like The Rock? Like these dudes. Like, I worked with Kobe Bryant at his basketball camp, and there was always the story of how he's up at 4 a.m. and he's in bed at midnight. Yeah,
so there are genetic differences with sleep, just like anyone else.
So some people can actually be good on that.
No, let me qualify it, though.
Okay.
All right, so ideal is 16 hours awake and 8 hours asleep. If I sleep 6 hours and you sleep 6 hours and your neighbor sleeps 6 hours and someone else sleeps 6 hours, we're all going to suffer differently. The super sleepers, as they're calling them, and there's people with there's basically 4 Clark genes essentially that are making these people suffer far less. So Trump was famous for saying he only slept 4 or 5 hours a night. And I know lots of people like that. Like I had a medical school professor that slept 5 hours a night,
Crazy.
But what has never been shown is that those people are at their best after sleep 5 hours a night. They just don't suffer as much as the rest of us. I just told you that the Navy SEALs I was seeing is 400 or so of these guys did sleep studies and actually weren't getting any sleep. And they were SEALs. And they had been doing that for years.
Yeah.
So you can survive it, but you're not at your best for sure. And you're choosing to age 25% faster if you sleep 6 hours. Like in age.
Is that a typical like ratio?
Well, I mean, I'm just doing simple math, right? So
Okay. Right. Yeah. 25. 2 hours of 8. Yeah. I got you. Okay. What about naps?
Naps.
How beneficial are naps?
Naps are great. So there's a book called Take a Nap that was written by, I think her name is Sarah Mednick. She's a UCSD faculty. It has this little wheel on it basically, and you can take a nap to optimize for creativity, for cognitive function, or for overall health, right? And they get progressively longer. But you can do this little wheel and say, well, I went to sleep at this time, I woke up at this time. What time should I take a nap if I want to improve my creativity?
That's kind of cool.
For how long? And you can calculate it out.
Yeah.
But like a really simple example, and these studies have been done numerous times. I could take somebody has to be what we call sleep adaptive, basically meaning they've been sleeping 8 hours a night or whatever. They've been sleeping as much as they need. The only way you really know how much sleep you need is to have like a really good, clean lifestyle that's really consistent. Go to bed at the same time every night and wake up whenever you wake up with no alarm clock.
Yeah.
That's going to turn out to be right around 8 hours. It's going to be 7.5 hours to 8.5 hours. That's how everybody plans out. Now, if you want to set your alarm clock and to get up earlier and say you feel great, well, cortisol makes you feel good, right? If I stay up 18 hours instead of 16 hours and I sleep 6 hours, tomorrow still comes at the same time. I didn't prepare all the way, right? I repaired, maybe I didn't repair all the way, but I did my repair, maybe didn't get all my prepare, but something was deficient. So tomorrow I still have to be able to do everything I was going to do if I slept 8 hours. So how do I compensate for that? I release more stress hormones. And stress hormones are fight or flight hormones. So tell me, how do you feel when you're adrenalized? You may not feel great, but you feel energetic and ready to go, right? Yeah. And so, especially when you have an alarm, it's in the name, and your cortisol shoots through the roof, your epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is adrenaline, that shoots through the roof. Your brain wakes up. You're like, go. Yeah. You go take a cold shower, do something, go work out, get in some sunlight. And now you're feeling great, man. I'm getting after it. And now you're mentally going, well, I'm doing the right thing because I'm getting up early and I'm working hard and I'm done. And so society has built this narrative that is good for us to do that. And so we're going to be energized by that. And we're going to talk ourselves psychologically into saying, hey, we're doing the right thing. But if you want to completely prepare and repair, it takes 8 hours. Right? And so if you want, and that's how we get better, and that's how we stay healthy, right? Because all aging is you're more likely to get any disease and you're more likely to die of any cause. That's what getting older means. So if I can repair every night 99.9%, I'm only aging 0.1% every day, right? If I choose to sleep 2 hours less, I'm only, all right, now I'm getting 75%, 76%. I'm getting worse every day. Now it's not exactly linear because there's ways to compensate and all that, but taking a nap doesn't get rid of the sleep deficit. You still didn't repair and prepare, right? If you didn't sleep enough, right? But when I got up in the morning, I'm catabolic. I have extra stress hormones. I'm breaking myself down. I take a nap. I get to repair a little bit of that and to like maybe shift some fuel sources around a little bit. And if I take a full sleep cycle, so from stage 1 sleep all the way to deep sleep and then back up through a little REM and back down to stage 2, and like I did a full sleep cycle, well, that's kind of like sleeping. And so the studies are like this. If you're sleep adapted, you've been sleeping 8 hours a night every night for the past 6 months and whatever, and you're on this great schedule. And then I say, all right, come in tomorrow morning. I'm going to teach you a skill, and I'm going to teach you to type with your left hand or whatever, or juggle or jump or lift a weight or I don't care, anything you want. I'm going to teach you something. And then I teach you that, and then I want you to come back at 7:00 tonight, and I'm going to test you on what I taught you. And you're going to be worse than you left training. So you're going to train for an hour, and you're going to be better at the end of that hour than you were when you started that. 7:00 when you come back, you're going to be worse. Yeah. Right? It decays. Now, with no more training, you go home and you go to sleep, and you come back tomorrow morning, and you're better than you left training. If you put a nap in the middle of the day, the same thing happens. So if I learn something in the morning and I go take a nap and then I come back at 7, I'm better than when I left training. And
because that nap allowed you to integrate what you learned.
Yes, yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
And then I go home and I go to sleep.
Yeah.
And I come back the next day, I'm even better.
So take a nap.
So
sleeping in school is like a good thing.
Yeah,
I shouldn't have gotten in trouble for that.
Right.
Because I was just integrating what the teacher was saying.
You're integrating, exactly.
Yeah, I knew that.
So you learn all this stuff. You learn all this stuff in the morning. Here's the crazy thing. Really think about it. You learned it all in the morning. You didn't train anymore. You just went and slept, and you got better.
Yeah.
And you went home and you slept, and you got better still.
Yeah.
So I've worked with MMA guys, and maybe they're a great grappler, and they're fighting somebody who's a great striker, and like, well, I really need to work on my boxing. I got 6 weeks to prepare. Train, nap, go home and go to sleep.
Wow, yeah. Okay,
train,
cool.
Right?
Yeah.
And you learn 3 times as fast.
That's awesome. Now, what about, have you done any research into like the inability to fall asleep or even like insomnia in relation to psychedelics and how different psychedelics could have an effect on your ability to fall asleep?
Yep. So the number one cause for insomnia is what we call psychophysiologic insomnia, and that's just one of those. It's really a job security word, right? We come up with fancy sounding things so people think we're smart and we know what we're talking about. And,
sure.
And it's like, I don't remember what he said, but it sounded good. Psychophysiologic sleep means, or insomnia means, that I can't sleep because I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to sleep. So I'm releasing stress hormones. In my example earlier, if you have good lifestyle, you go to sleep the same time every night and you wake up the same time every morning, you don't need the light to wake you up. You don't need a sound to wake you up. What wakes you up?
You hit 8 hours, right?
Cortisol.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So your cortisol, I told you, is the lowest it'll ever be during deep sleep, and then it gradually goes up throughout the night, and at some point it reaches a level that'll wake you up. Cortisol keeps you alert in proportion to your environment. When you first wake up, you have just the right amount of cortisol to wake up. Now, if somebody kicks in your front door and starts yelling at you, your cortisol shoots through the roof, right? If you go lay on your couch and read a book, your cortisol pretty much stays the same, but it gradually goes up and it peaks around 1 to 3 p.m., which is where like 98% of all world's records are set, like when people's cortisol levels are peaked there. And then it gradually comes back down over the day, and it has to come back down lower than that point that woke you up in order for you to go to sleep. Anything that you do to add stress to your life, such as not getting enough sleep, gives you more cortisol, or bankruptcy, or divorce, or problems at work, or whatever. So we run around at a higher basal level of stress, so it's harder to get to that low enough level to fall asleep. So we're stressed, we have high stress hormones, we can't fall asleep, and we lay in bed and we look at the clock and we start doing mental math. We figure out how much more time, and if I don't get enough sleep, then this is going to happen. I had stuff to do that, I'm going to be so damn tired, and your mind, and now you're stressing yourself out more. You're getting more and more stress hormones. Yeah. What did I tell you all the psychedelics do? Decrease all the stress hormones, decrease all the amygdala tone. So it's not at all uncommon for people to go, man, after I did Ibogaine, I slept 12 hours that night, and I slept 10 hours every night for the next 3 months, and I had no problems going to sleep.
People on a microdose protocol too, probably, right?
Yeah, because the microdosing is keeping some of that amygdala tone away as well. Yeah, and then of course the other benefit of the psychedelics, if they're done correctly, right? If they're done in the right setting, there's some sort of counseling going along with that, and there's some sort of introspection, some sort of journaling, some sort of you working on yourself. And when you're doing that without amygdala tone, you're going to make more progress. You're going to be able to improve yourself faster, and you're going to be able to get the stressful things out of your way. And you're going to get, with a neuroplastic brain, you're going to be able to figure out new ways to think about it, new ways to manage it. And now I'm going to have less stress
because you're altering your consciousness as you go.
And if I'm allowing myself, if I'm allowing myself to go to sleep every night, like I feel like doing, well, then I'm remodeling my brain for that behavior too, right? And all my default mode network, and it gets all sorts of fancy, descriptors of exactly what it means. It's my grumpy old man programming, right? It's just this, it's my non-plasticity, right? It's like, this is what I do when I'm doing me, right? This is my default mode. Well, if I'm neuroplastic and I start changing all my behaviors, well, then this is what I do when I'm doing me. Right. And I sleep 10 hours a night, 9 hours a night, or 8 hours a night, or whatever, right? Yeah. And so it definitely can have some huge effects. and that's all anecdotal, but we're talking about hundreds of people, hundreds of guys.
Right,
I know
right,
that.
right.
I think
Yeah.
it's not like.
Do you see a world where your sleep remedy cocktail?
Mm-hmm.
Do you see a world where a psychedelic component could be integrated within a product like that?
Yeah,
in a commercial way.
There's some pretty good research around psilocybin, like some mushroom additives being able to help with sleep. I hope that's in our future. Marijuana's not great.
Not great for assisting
for sleep.
Okay.
The THC makes people feel like they slept really well. See, my problem is I have like the worst sales job in the world, right? Because what's the worst thing you can say as a salesman, especially as a physician, right? A snake oil salesman is like, fixes everything.
Right.
Makes you better at everything.
Right,
no,
right,
it'll
right.
make you faster, smarter, better looking. Like,
Yeah.
Everybody's like, oh, sure. Right.
Yeah.
All right. So that's for my first downfall.
Somebody tried to hit me with that at the grocery store yesterday. They were giving samples of sea moss.
Oh, yeah.
And like, I've heard of sea moss. I know a couple things about sea moss. And this guy was like, man, put it on after you shave, wash your hands with it, like put it in your eyes as eye drop. I was like, yo, I'm not putting sea moss in every orifice.
Your penis is going to be like 6 feet long when this is over.
If he had said that, I would have bought it. That was the one thing he missed.
So, yeah. So, I think I'm trying to tell people this does everything. It fixes everything. Like it makes you faster, it makes you stronger, it makes you better looking, it makes you live longer. Blah, 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 blah. Terrible job. Now the other bad part is if I coach you and we work together and I change your psychology a little bit, maybe you do some psychedelics.
But isn't that what it changes though? It changes the way you think, which
Right.
then in turn can change almost everything.
Well,
Is that kind of the flow of it?
yeah. I mean, so in 100%, so with 100% transparency, I can't get anybody to sleep well without changing how they think.
Right.
Right. So that's a big part of my job. So a big part of my job is first to figure out, well, what's going to motivate you, right? And then I'm going to tell you how sleep's going to do that for you. And it's all honest and all the research is out there. And if fear motivates you, then I'll be like, well, do you know that you have 10 times more likely to have Alzheimer's if you don't? Do you know that you're 10 times more likely to die in a car crash? Do you know that you're, like all these things, like I can show you everything. Like your risk of diabetes, like your insulin sensitivity drops 30% in a single night of 6 hours of sleep instead of 8 hours of sleep. You want to be a diabetic? You want to be, right. So whatever your motivation is, you want to perform better, you want to be smarter, like I'll work on that. So we work on your psychology first. We work on your lifestyle has to be there, right? You can't eat pizza, play video games all day, do nothing, like have a crappy lifestyle, watch television until 9:59 and go get in bed and fall asleep at 10 o'clock. That's not the way the world works. You're going to have to change your behavior. In order to change your behavior, you have to change your psychology. But here's where it really falls apart. If I do my job well and you sleep perfectly, you don't remember it. You have no experience of it whatsoever. You wake up the next day and go, I don't know, I guess I slept. And that's how Ambien got away with it, by the way.
Right.
So Ambien made you unconscious. Like you said earlier.
That was it.
Sleep
Yeah,
or lack of consciousness. So
it
dissociated that neocortex so much that people's midbrain brainstem, their lizard brain, was putting them in their cars, driving down to Vegas, gambling away their life savings, picking up hookers, eating all the cupcakes out of the cupboard, whatever, like just doing primal stuff, right? Fornicating, fighting, fleeing, right? Taking risks. Like that's what the lizard brain does. And so once all the research came out, they knew it. They knew it all along. All it did was dissociate you. You can lay in bed. Well, so by the way, there's people when they went and gambled away their life savings and came back and went to sleep. Some of those people lived in Vegas and they did that in 4 hours and they came back and they woke up the next morning and thought they slept 8 hours.
Crazy.
Right. And they've done this with studies where they put somebody in Ambien. We have all the electrodes on them when we're watching them and they lay down, maybe they close their eyes, they kind of doze and they get up and then they go in the kitchen, they make a bunch of food, they play some video games, watch a show, whatever, and they come back and they get back in bed and 2 hours later they wake up and they look at their clock and they go, I slept 8 hours. No, you didn't. But even if you just lay in bed, you're just dissociated. If when we look at your sleep architecture and those sleep studies, it doesn't look like, and like I said, especially the REM for Ambien and benzodiazepines, the same thing. So Valiums and Xanax, they behave very similarly for REM, and then alcohol. does that, and then does the deep sleep. And so marijuana, THC, affects both REM and deep, but it makes people's experience of it is like, man, I smelled like a rock. I felt great.
Right.
And so that's what Ambien was doing too, right? It's like people thought that they were, and on average, people actually only fell asleep 13 minutes sooner and got a total of 38 minutes more sleep, meaning unconsciousness, but had such poor quality of sleep that they were losing sleep every night, right? They would have been way better off living through their insomnia. Yeah. And in fact, we know that if people who use sleep drugs chronically, which is only defined as 6 months. So if you take Ambien for 6 months, now I said that was the study design. I assume you have to keep going longer. But people who use sleep drugs throughout their life die on average 14 years younger.
Damn.
People who work shift work and stay up at night, they die 14 years younger on average, right? So law enforcement, first responders, all those type of guys. That's the way the world works, man. You can't, like I said, that's part of the contract, and you aren't doing the contract right. And so,
all right, add this to the contract. As we wrap it up, I want your quick points, the top things people should do in the evening before going to bed to optimize their sleep, and then the best things they should do when they wake up. Do you have like a hit list of maybe some things you do or things you've studied on both ends of that sleep cycle?
Yep. So I'll discuss it as though we're dealing with some kind of insomnia, whether we are or not, just because it'll include the non-insomnia too. But so this is the whole case. The way we evolved, first of all, we suck as predators without guns and weapons, right? So like we're a weak, soft, slow, clawless, fangless animal. Yeah. And so it makes sense, and we don't see very well at night. And about 80% of our brain is dedicated to vision in some form or fashion. So it's like we are a very visual animal. As soon as the sun goes down, we can't see. So what would we do? We go tuck away, right? But if you've ever gone camping, and we've studied hunter-gatherers, there's still like 300,000 people in the world that live like hunter-gatherers that have never seen electricity, never seen flashlight, anything. It's crazy. They spend 2 hours a day getting their food, and the rest of the day they're just screwing around. Like, I mean, it's just like hanging. The original rich, aristocratic people are just and so, but it takes, from the time the sun goes down. This is all of sleep hygiene. It's 100% of sleep hygiene. You can read a million different variations of what to do and why to do it, but this is what it is. The sun goes down, the blue light goes out of your eyes. The nerve cells in the back of your eye, they're called ganglion, they sense blue light. They don't have anything to do with vision. So blind people can have normal circadian rhythms, right? So blue light goes away. I'm assuming because the sky's blue, we're triggered by that. That, like I said, long circuitous pathway. Eventually melatonin gets released and your brain starts changing chemically, physiologically. Your neocortex starts slowing down. You quit paying attention to your environment nearly as much, right? You tuck away somewhere safe so that you're decreasing anxiety. You're getting preyed upon. You're not going to walk around and fall off a cliff or whatever. So you're going to go get safe. You're going to slow your brain down because the chemicals are doing that. And then you don't have HVAC because you're a caveman. And so it gets colder and your body temperature drops. That's sleep hygiene. That's 100% sleep hygiene. So decrease the blue light, decrease the stress and interaction with the world, and then lower the temperature, lower your body temperature. So that's all sleep hygiene. Now, you need to exercise. Exercise has all sorts of physiological benefits. It would take us, 17 podcasts to get through half of them, right? Sure. But you need to exercise and you need to eat reasonably well. One of the main reasons that Americans don't sleep well is because they're pre-diabetic and they don't know it, right? Or they're diabetic and they don't control it, or they don't know it, or whatever. So high fluctuation, like a big change in your blood glucose triggers a stress response. The only animal on this planet that chooses to sleep deprive itself is us. Yeah. The only time any other animal does that is if they're going through famine. So they want to be able to get up earlier, go to bed later, travel farther to get more food, right? or if they're being preyed upon, right?
Right.
They're being stalked.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like they're going to only sleep as much as they have to so they can not get eaten, right?
Yeah.
So evolutionarily, we probably have that wiring in us too, right? So to some degree, if we're sleep depriving ourselves, our body's convinced that we're being preyed upon or we're about to hit famine, and that changes our appetite and how we use our fuel and all sorts of stuff. That'd be a whole different story. But so if the sun goes down and everything changes in my brain, and it takes like those 3 hours to do that, and all my neurochemistry changes, and then my blood glucose stays pretty normal and my physiology doesn't interrupt it, then everything's going to go great. If I'm pre-diabetic, peri-diabetic, I'm not exercising, I'm eating like, refined glucose, sugar, syrupy, corn, like all this kind of stuff, and I have these big fluctuations. So a diabetic can have a blood glucose of 400, which is like 4 times what it should be, right? And it can drop to 300 really quickly, and your brain goes, oh, famine.
Damn.
Because it's just the change.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter the total. It's like, how fast did that change? So that'll wake you up, right? So that'll cause insomnia. So if you have any insulin sensitivity issues, don't eat carbs past lunch, I would say. So dinner should be just fat and protein. And then or if you're going to have carbs, it's a really slow carb, a cruciferous vegetable, leafy, green leafy, things that have a lot of fiber, put a lot of fat in there. It takes a long time to break them down. And that will prevent you from getting sleep. Now, the most important part, though, is the psychology. So lifestyle, you're going to get some exercise. You're going to try to control your stress during the day, and you're going to eat reasonably well. Okay. It's not that hard to eat well, right? Like, I when I work with my clients, I do sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation, right? The nutrition is the easiest one, but it's one that everybody's hung up on. There's a million books about it, and there's all these fads, and all that. It's like, hey, think about 500 years ago. Do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Like, you evolved over millions of years. This body's 200,000 years old, and then the last 200 years, you started putting shit in it that it
right.
Like, just don't do that.
Right.
Just eat food. And so that's the thing. But everybody has stress. That's the way the world works. Especially in our world, stress that's a real deal. It's a big deal. So this is the most powerful thing I do. And I give this away on my website. You can download this PDF, but it's literally the most powerful thing I do with the clients that I work with for a year. Take a piece of paper, draw a line straight down the line, vertical line right down the middle, cut it, to where it's cut in half. To do on the left, to worry on the right. So to-do list, you write everything you have to do, everything you have to do that you would think about. So as far out in the future as you're likely to worry about to-do list. For me, that's only a day. I'm lucky that way. It's like, I don't care past I haven't planned my day past this podcast. Like, that's how I am. I'm like, I got to do these 2 things. Some people is like, I'm going to worry about all the stuff I got to get done in the next 6 weeks before, whatever. So whatever it is, however long you'll worry, like however long you'll stay concerned, put that. That's the to-do list. On the other side is the to-worry list. The to-worry list is shit that you don't have any control over, but you don't want to forget to worry about it, right? We just want to worry. We just want to think it. We want to think it through. We don't have any control over whether or not whoever gets reelected or whatever. We don't have any control, but whatever.
So you make this list before bed.
So you make this during the day when your brain's alert and awake, and you're not likely to carry a bunch of stress because you made this stressful list before bed. You're like, shit. Okay. So now you have an alarm clock that goes off an hour before you go to bed, right? That alarm clock is exactly the same as the alarm clock that wakes you up. Exactly, right? They're just as important. Just like you don't say, well, I'm just going to sleep another half hour. No, because you just screwed up your whole day. You don't say, I'm going to stay up, but like I'll start getting ready for bed in a half hour. No, the alarm clock goes off an hour before bed. You dim the lights. You get the blue light out of your eyes for sure. You put on blue blocking glasses. You put F-Lux on your computer. Ideally, you stop anything that would stimulate you, right? So you're not going to work out.
So that's 1 hour before bed. You're done with pretty much everything. There's no TV. There's no food. There's no sugar.
No, you can watch TV. You can read. Don't read things about murder and the world collapsing. Whatever. Things that are going to stress you out. Don't watch that. Don't read that. Okay. All right, so anything settling. If you can do like some yoga, some light stretching, listen to some soft music, that's even better, right? So an hour before bed, you're getting ready for bed. Then you go to bed at the same time every night, right? Especially if you have insomnia. This is how you do it. Every night you go to bed exactly so. I set my alarm clock at 9. From 9 to 10, I'm getting ready for sleep.
10 o'clock,
bed. 10, I'm in bed. The lights are off, and I don't have a clock. anywhere in sight. I can't see it. There's an alarm clock that's going to go off somewhere, but I can't see it. And I'm going to lay in bed until that alarm clock goes off. And if I can't sleep, no big deal. I'm just going to lay there. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do some breathing. I'm going to do some box breathing. I'm going to do some progressive muscle relaxation. I'm going to think about pleasant thoughts. And if I start worrying, I'm going to go, oh, no, that's on the list. And I'm going to handle that list when the alarm clock goes off.
Oh, okay, cool. So you're just you put everything from your brain onto a piece of paper so that you can just have it there. And then when you wake up, you can ingest it again and return to it.
And then if you take in what we just talked about for the last hour, you can say, well, not only am I going to handle that in the morning, but the best I'm ever going to be at handling that is after I've slept 8 hours. Right. So I'm going to be at my peak tomorrow morning when I start
you're already telling yourself, okay, I can get after it.
The ideal thing is to do this, and this 8 hours is actually preparing me for that list.
Yeah.
And this is sort of my workout to make me strong enough to do this, right?
Okay.
So that's how you think about it. And so you lay there, and if any of those thoughts come in your head, you go, that's on the list. And if it's not on the list, put it on the list. So I want that list right next to your bed. Do you have permission to put on as much light as you need and have a pen and add that to your list? And then you lay back down. And if you wake up in the middle of the night and you don't know what time it is, it doesn't matter.
Maybe the alarm hasn't gone off.
Your alarm might go.
That's all that you need to know.
Your alarm might go off in 5 minutes. So just lay there and breathe.
Right.
And if it goes off in 5 minutes, get up in 5 minutes. If it's not going to go off for 4 hours and you just lay there and you breathe, you're going to fall back asleep.
Right.
If you're not worrying, you're going to fall back asleep.
That's great. I'm making a list, dude.
Yep.
I'm making a list.
That right there is the biggest secret.
That's super cool.
That's all sleep hygiene, and that's all the psychology you need for sleep.
That's killer.
It takes a while to convince yourself of that, so you really have to focus on what we said earlier to believe that, hey, that list, being able to handle that list, like that.
Take some mushrooms, change your brain.
Yeah, exactly.
Where can people find your stuff online?
DocParsley.com, DOC, short for doctor, obviously, and then Parsley like the herb,
Parsley like the herb,
PARSLEY, DocParsley.com.
Cool.
And
this was awesome, man. This was a lot of information that I really appreciate because I don't know a lot about it. I don't know a lot about much, but I'm learning more about this. So it's really cool.
I don't feel like I know that much either. So I've been learning for a long time, and there's way more to know.
Well, it's great that you come from this traditional Western medicine space, and you had that curiosity to keep pushing you. I mean, I appreciate it. I know everybody out there will too.
Well, I think maybe something that really helped me was being a terrible student when I was young. Because I grew up believing that I was dumb. I didn't try in school because I didn't think I could do well in school anyway. So why embarrass myself? And I'm stupid.
And that sent you on all these other paths to learn.
Now
which
it's
is great.
Now I learned a bunch of stuff and I tested and I proved that I could remember, but I don't feel like I know anything still. I still feel like I'm dumb. I'm like, I don't know.
That's good though, because then you get to keep pushing yourself to learn. So we should all think we're more dumb.
If I found out tomorrow that everything I thought was true was wrong, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I would be like, yeah, I get it. It happens all the time.
Right on. Well, for now, you're right, brother, and I appreciate you being here, man.
I appreciate it.
It's been a blast.
Yeah.
See you, everybody.
All right.
And that's it, man. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode with Dr. Kirk Parsley. You can check out Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy line of sleep aid supplements at docparsley.com. Parsley like the herb. Doc Parsley is an incredible man, super knowledgeable, and my brain hurt in a good way after this episode. It still hurts a little bit. I feel hungover from all the knowledge that I put inside my body. So check him out, docparsley.com. Check out the podcast at Good Trip Podcast on Instagram. I am at Brent Pella. I repost a bunch of clips there. And you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also on Spotify and iTunes, do the whole rating and subscribing thing there. You know how it works. Other than that, hey, I love you guys, and I appreciate you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful week. I'll see you next time. Peace.